Hi, I'm Khe Hy, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to another episode of A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy. Today, I'm joined by Khe Hy. Khe is the founder of Rad Reads and a thought leader in productivity and personal growth. This is an episode I've been wanting to bring to you for a long time. We dive into how our mindsets and habits have evolved over time, the balance between fame and authenticity, and the importance of self-awareness. Khe shares his unique experiences, including his shift from productivity systems to self-healing. This is really, really interesting, especially in the mind frame I'm in right now, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. And he also shares how internal family systems therapy has transformed his approach. Stick around, join me for this conversation. I hope you'll get a lot out of it. I know I did. Here it is, a deep and insightful conversation, and a productive one at that, about finding balance and purpose in our lives. Let's get started. Here's my conversation with Khe Hy. Enjoy. Khe, thanks so much for joining me on the program today. Really appreciate it. And for those that are watching the live stream on YouTube, members of the Time Crafting Trust community, as well as once this episode dropped, of course, it was available to everybody on my YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us. Khe, this has been a conversation I've wanted to have for a while.
Likewise, I'm honored to be here.
Well, the first thing that I want to talk about is kind of the shift that I've noticed in your writing as of probably the last several months. It's not like it's not been jarring, it's been a subtle shift because I remember you, and I think I saw you post this on X or Twitter about like the shift in your mindset around productivity and like this never-ending pursuit of that. And even when you go to if you go to Rad Reads and you start reading some of the back catalog, but also you subscribe, I've noticed there's been less of a I wouldn't say less. There's been less direct talk about productivity and more about the things that live within that allow you to be productive, right? And I want to get a sense from you, like what shift has occurred in for you in the time that you've been writing and thinking about this stuff when it comes to productivity, because I've felt it. It seemed like it was happening, and then I've noticed it actually in your work. And you're like, okay, so he's moving in that direction. So I'd love for you to share that right out of the gate.
Excellent and astute observation. I would say, I'll start with a quick story. Is one of my longest coaching clients saw me on an Ali Abdaal video years ago when Ali would have me on his channel. Now he's too big, and he sent me a LinkedIn message and he said, "Hey, I hear you talk a lot about OmniFocus and GTD. Can you coach me?" And so we did this onboarding call and we coached me. And I talked a little bit about my philosophy then. This was probably 3 years ago. And he said, I see a lot of people, I've met a lot of people like you. And at some point, they just completely stop thinking about productivity and they drop all their systems and they just kind of live their life. And he said, "I think that's going to be you." and he was spot on. So to rewind, I guess I'll just give you. I was like productivity in my 20s was about it was about two things: how I could make as much money as possible. So like basically squeezing every minute of output out of that was possible, and how to not get in trouble. And what I mean by that is I worked on Wall Street, very kind of a lot of low EQ people, very demanding culture. You get yelled at all the time. And I just wanted to use productivity to not get yelled at. I'm a people pleaser. So make money, don't get yelled at. That was productivity in my 20s. Productivity in my 30s was how do I own my time? Part of that was I shifted out of corporate at 35. We might talk about that into becoming an entrepreneur. How do I own my time? And what I realized is productivity in my 40s is how do I heal myself? Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of those behaviors, owning your time, being scared of of making mistakes, being a people pleaser, wanting to make a lot of money, a lot of those were manifestations of what I'll call, core wounds. I don't like to use the word trauma. There's a lot of kind of trauma glorifying out there. And again, To me, I grew up in a lower middle class family. All of my basic needs were taken care of. My parents are loving, caring. No one ever, verbally or physically abused me. But like anyone, I'm a human. I felt like an outsider. I felt poorer than we actually were. I felt unworthy of love, things that I didn't realize till like my 30s. And so what I realized that productivity was a way to kind of overcompensate for a lot of those feelings. And in my 40s, I was just like, screw this. Like, why would I just keep adding more widgets and doohickeys into my life where I can actually get to the underlying need, the unmet need that exists within me?
Wait till the 50s. I'm hitting 50 in 6 days. So I'm actually at the tail end of that part. It's so fascinating because I think when you're talking to that client, first off, how old was that client? Can you give like a range? Can you give me a date range? You think like
So
age
he
wise?
was So this was he's about 5 years younger than me, and this was 3 years ago.
Okay, so
So
so he was wise
he was
beyond his
30.
years then. I mean, because
Yeah.
normally people don't come to that conclusion until they are the age that we're talking about, like their 40s, their
Yeah.
50s, right? Which why it drives me nuts sometimes when I have people who in the life coach movement, I think that there's merit to it, but I also think that sometimes you've got people who have not lived enough life that try to
Yes.
coach life, and you have to kind of go through a good chunk of it. I think in some, I mean, again, it's not to crap on. There's a lot of good that can happen from there. Kind of like when you're talking about again. Trauma is such a nuanced thing, right? In a lot of ways, and I was a lot like I grew up in a lower middle class family, keeping up with the Joneses in the 80s, all that stuff. I lived further
Mhm.
away, like, but there was always this, like, there was always for me, like, I wanted to keep on top of things. That's what it was. I didn't want to drop the ball. Like you, a people pleaser. I didn't want anything to slip through the cracks. So when I was working at Costco, I'm like, I have to put some systems in place to make sure that
Mhm.
doesn't happen. And they need to be as automated as possible so that there's no guesswork coming from me when this happens, which is kind of where time crafting was born. This idea of like, it's probably born from like, I don't trust myself with no devices.
Yes.
I have to have something. But what I think happens, and this is, we'll talk about your journey. And by the way, I think for those, we'll put a link to the show notes for that video because I think it's important, that video that you kind of with Ali. But also, Cal Newport has a great podcast episode that we'll link to in the show notes about the history, the story, the love-hate relationship, the journey of productivity, being like going from the David Allen era to the like the minimal, like all that stuff. It's a really well done and done
Wow.
episode. And Cal has, I mean, he knows this stuff inside and out because he's been in that realm. And we see books like Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, Feel Good
Mhm.
Productivity by Ali. So the time is right and ripe
Yeah.
for this kind of, I think, more sustainable approach to living, right? And so when you're
Mhm.
talking about when you read, the idea of you help people with living a productive and examined life, to me,
Mhm.
I wonder if at this point, I know I'm there, where it's like there's a ebb and flow between productive and examining. Like there's this
Mhm.
reflection, action, reflection, action, reflection, action. Is that where you feel you're at now? And how does that kind of affect not just the way you operate in life, but even the work, like the writing that you're doing and the things that you're sharing?
Mhm. So reflective action. I mean, I will say that I am still a very, very highly action oriented person, right?
Right.
I mean, I work. Yeah, I've probably worked out 5 days a week since I was 16 years old, and I'm turning 45 this summer.
Hmm.
I surf 6 days a week, so I meditate twice a day for 10 years. So I'm very action oriented.
Right.
Excuse me, but I think reflection has always been a big part of this. And, there was always a joke with rad reads: come for the productivity, stay for the existential.
Yeah.
And so we almost used it as a bait and switch. And that was appealing to people, and it was distasteful to many people. And so it kind of very selectively kind of picked my following. I would say now that I am very action oriented, but I really ask myself, like, like what is really happening below the layers now. And so, for example, I recently started taking music classes. So I'm a true beginner and I'm learning how to make hip hop beats.
Nice.
So like just like how someone would have a guitar teacher, I have a beat making teacher, and we meet every 2 weeks, and he gives me homework and all that. But as I was sitting in the car today, just driving here, and sorry I was late, I was saying to myself, like, oh, I wonder when I'll upload my first track on SoundCloud. Right. And then
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I wonder, I wonder what it would take to actually get a production credit on a song. Right.
Yep.
Keep in mind, like I've taken one beat making class
Yeah.
and it was yesterday. Right. And
So
I'm
you're already
thinking,
you're forecasting already. You're like literally, and that's natural based on your story to this point, right?
Mm. And so that's where the introspection kicks in, which is like, well, what's happening here, okay? First of all, more than anyone, to get good at anything's going to take a decade. So like if you even have a shot at a production credit, that will be like you'll be 55 years old, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. But then it goes back. It's like how much of this is driven by your need to feel seen? Right. And that's the why question. And so for those who aren't familiar, I had a Wall Street career and there I was really chasing money,
Yeah.
money and status in a very kind of known trajectory, especially I grew up in New York City. So especially in that world. Then I walked away from it. I walked away from a lot of money and I walked away from that status of being a Wall Street person at a pretty young age. And then, but I did something sneaky. And the sneaky thing I did was like, well, not Arthur Brooks calls it the four false idols.
Yeah.
So there's power, status, money, and pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never really cared much about power. Like that's more like a K Street thing. And in DC, don't care about that.
Yep.
But I had the money. And then I was trading in in my encore career as an online, I hate the word influencer, thought leader. I was chasing fame.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen the limits. I've seen what it takes to chase fame on the internet. And let me tell you, I think it's actually harder to become famous on the internet than to become successful on Wall Street.
I wouldn't doubt it.
It is that competitive.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. And I mean, the thing is, I would wonder, and I'll let you, I'm just going to throw this in here really quickly. I think the interesting thing about the online world is it allows for collaboration and cooperation, unlike some of those other, which is the saving grace that it has. But that I'm on board with you there as far as fame. But yeah, keep going. So didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So in this second chapter, encore career, I chased fame, and I'm kind of seeing the limits of that. Where I look at these people with millions, and I get jealous. But then I also I have the privilege and of seeing behind the kimono, under the kimono, and I'm like, oh my God, I would never. I give you this, like one very famous podcaster who I'm friends with, who we all know. His 5 reports, each one is in charge of repurposing materials from the podcast for every social channel. So YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. 5 employees. Let's say each one of those people makes $360K, right? Probably, I have no idea how much, but let's just be conservative. Sure. $300,000 of expenses just to promote your podcast on 5 channels. So not to mention someone has to manage those people, right? And so I know what it takes for that level of fame. And I'm not interested, but bring it back to this beat making class. It's like, there's still this kernel of me that says, if you're not seen for doing something, like it's not enough for me to know that I'm a good father. Mm-hmm. I want people to know that I'm a good father. Yeah. And like me, that's some healing needs to take place there. And I actually think, to tie it all back together to productivity, that would actually be the most quote unquote productive thing for me to do, is to figure out, why do I care so much that people know whatever about me? Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. It's so I wonder if in 5 years, when we talk about this as you're approaching 50, what that looks like. Like because it is, it's so fascinating. And by the way, there's another great talk. I think it's a TED talk that Derek Sivers did about the three reasons you run your own business. And there's three primary reasons. One rises above all else. It's fame, fortune, and freedom. And he goes, one will
Mhm.
be your primary driver. The others could happen, but one is your driver. And I remember he did this talk, I think it was at World Domination Summit. Chris Gillibo was at a conference. And it was I gravitate, it's freedom for me. For freedom.
Yeah.
Like I want to be home with my kids. I want to be able to do all that.
Mhm.
Fame, okay, sure. If it happened, it happened. And I'm I come from a background of doing stand-up and performance and things like that. So
Mhm.
I'm in that camp with you in terms of, I want people to know, I want people to see. The fortune part is important, but only to a point. And I think it's kind of like too much fame is problematic. Obviously,
Mhm.
too much money can be problematic. Too much freedom, it can be if unless you have a
Mhm.
framing device. And I've worked with clients, as sure you have, that had no freedom and no agency over their time, and then they retired or they moved or they became entrepreneur. They're like, now I have all this agency and I don't know what to do. So even though you've kind of shifted towards like away from the apps and all that stuff, much like I have,
Mhm.
because I used to write about apps all the time. I still
Yeah.
obviously use them and there's still
Yeah.
elements there. Are you still, I know you use Notion still, right? Like you're
Yeah.
obviously using, so I wonder, it's a shift probably in the hierarchy of where that fits in, right? Like the framing, you should be able to do whatever, however you could put it in a notebook and it would be fine
Yeah.
versus putting it
Yeah.
inside of. So can you share a bit about that for those that are
Yeah.
listening? They're like, okay, so does he not use apps? Like what does he do now to
Mhm.
make sure that he can, number one, get the things done he really needs and wants
Yeah.
to get done, but also, those things don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think most people, maybe not in productivity circles, but in kind of normie circles, would be like, "Wow, this guy's still super dialed in." So I'll give you my stack. For tasks, I use OmniFocus still, but to show you that like these things don't really matter anymore, is I think OmniFocus is up to 6,
Yeah.
and I'm still using 3.
Yeah.
So like I haven't even bothered to update to the like, so I still have the janky UI and all that. And I think I have 6 lists in OmniFocus. So I'm using a very lightweight GTD, almost like anti-GTD, like personal, family, work, like maybe 2 lists for work, and
Yeah.
that's it, right?
Yeah.
One of the most powerful things that I love about OmniFocus, and feel free to cut me off if I'm getting too specific, but I set review frequencies for every project.
Yep.
And so, my family list maybe triggers every 14 days, and my, work list triggers every 6 days to like remind me to review it. And so I don't even do weekly reviews anymore, but I have this like little mini daily review of like when these lists kind of resurface.
Mm-hmm.
So that's for productivity. For work, I have 1 colleague and 4 contractors, 1 direct report full time and 4 contractors. I've made it very explicit that I don't want to interact with any of the contractors, so I just interact directly with my she's a product manager.
Sure.
So I interact directly with her, and we use a very lightweight Notion ecosystem where we have some shared tasks, and we have like we don't use Google Docs. We basically use Notion instead of
Mm-hmm.
Google
Yep.
Docs.
Yep.
And then the thing that I think still is really important is I use Superhuman
Mm-hmm.
for email. And really, like, I don't really reply to emails. I batch reply to emails. So unless it's something scheduling wise. And so at the end of the day, or at some like low energy moment during the day, I'll reply to most of my emails. I usually use schedule send to have them hit their inboxes at 8 a.m. The next morning.
Yep.
Because I don't want, so even if someone send me an email like, and I reply 5 minutes later, I don't want to set the expectation with them
Yeah.
that I reply within 5 minutes.
Yeah. The message,
even though I might have replied.
well, because there's more the subtext tells them, oh, look, Kay's up at like 10 p.m. or whatever it is, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I do the same, absolutely, because I'm a night owl, so I don't want to get when I'm doing the night owl work. That's the deeper work time for
Mhm.
me. So
Exactly, yeah.
I send those like anytime I have to do a schedule send, it's like 10 a.m. Pacific. Like it's like that's
Got it.
1 o'clock Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. At least I know I'm up and conscious and able to do the things I need to do
Yeah.
around it. But yeah, like a lot of people, and that just takes practice and habit building to just make that what you do, like as opposed to me. And obviously, there's probably exceptions to the rule in terms of, but that's why they're
If I'm waiting
exceptions.
for a proposal,
Yeah.
if I'm waiting for a proposal, I'm checking my email more often.
Yeah.
Right? It just
Yeah.
that's the way. And I actually do want them to know that I reply within 5 minutes.
Sure.
If they're about to wire me money. So there's always exceptions. I think the one thing that has been where this client was right is that a lot of these things has fallen off, but they've been replaced by habits and rituals.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't really think of it I've read Atomic Habits, but I don't even think about it this way. But my habits are so powerfully stacking. So I'll give you an example. I wake up without an alarm, time freedom, and immediately I'll meditate for 20 minutes. And I basically, so that's a habit that's been there for 10 years. Then I don't open my email until my kids are out of the house. Because once you open your email, or Slack, both, you're just in that I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. You just pivot to react mode.
Yep.
And I just don't want to be in react mode around my kids, especially because I've created a business and a life for myself. There's no emergencies in my world.
Right.
That's my design. Right. When I worked on Wall Street, there was a lot of emergencies. The Fed just cut rates. This person just, died in a car accident,
Yeah.
So I've designed a world where there's no emergencies. And so let me live that. If I've created a world with no emergencies, then take advantage of a world with no emergencies and don't check your email.
And cultivate it too. Because as soon as you it's so easy in the world we live in for those kind of boundaries that we've set for ourselves to be kind of scuttled. And if we don't respect our own boundaries, there's no way that we can expect anybody else to.
Exactly. And so I won't bore you with my whole habit stack, but then, then I turn on my email, I see what needs to happen for the day. And then I go surf.
Yeah.
Right. And then I surf and then I come back and I basically eat the same breakfast / brunch every day. That's my Steve Jobs, whatever, black cashmere polo moment. Yep. And so my days are pretty and that takes me to 10:30, 10:45 when I start work. So it's pretty programmed. I've eaten well. I've exercised well. I'm very focused. I've been present with my kids. I've meditated and I've slept, that's a huge win every day, just built into the routine of the day. And I have a similar wind down routine at the end of the day, but it basically is almost the inverse of what I just described. And I literally do that every day.
You must be a morning. You've got to be a morning person if you're surfing, right? What time are you up? What time are you up?
I naturally wake up at about 6:45.
Okay, so it's not terribly we're not talking Hell Elrod Miracle Morning 3 a.m. stuff. We're talking or 5 a.m. club with Robin Sharma. You're you're in between the really early risers and then the diurnals that get up at around 7.
Well, to be fair though, I used to not let to talk about different types of freedom, and I used to not let myself sleep in the sense that I'm after 6 hours, I wake up, I surf, I start my day and things like that. And I could talk a whole lot. I'll plant the seed. Feel free to run with it if you want. But I've done a type of therapy called internal family systems, IFS, that has really kind of rewired my entire kind of approach to productivity.
What is that? Share that, because I'm not familiar with it, and I'm sure that people listening are first off, what is it, and how has it had that impact on you?
Yeah. So I'll start you off with a story, and then I'll tell you the thing. I don't watch. I have problem with leisure, especially in the 20s and 30s. And so even if I did something that was leisure, it was still reading a biography of Katharine Graham or Abraham Lincoln or, Team of Rivals, things like that. So I barely watch TV. I think I've seen one movie a year in the past, in the past 20 years.
Wow.
So I've only seen 20 movies, not excluding children's movies.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of those. And that's part of a framing. And, it does come back to this, is there enough time? I need to always be creating output. Even when I'm resting, I need to be creating output. So that's just that's me. And I'm sure many of you, the listeners, can relate to some wiring like that.
Yeah.
Right. Every moment needs to be productive, even rest needs to be productive.
Right.
So I've never watched much TV. I've kind of watched, a few seasons of Game of Thrones, a few seasons of, some of the greatest shows ever, but that's about it. So IFS is internal family systems, and it's a gentleman by the name of Dick Schwartz. And so, kind of the key book on this is a book called No Bad Parts. And there's tons of IFS coaches. If you go to like psychology.com, to psychologytoday.com, you'll see IFS therapist, IFS coach, things like that. Basically, it says that we're a collection of parts. And so you might have like, I presume there's a lot of Enneagram 3s listening to this. So you would have, people pleasing part.
Mm-hmm.
You might have an emotionally disassociative part. Like you can think of them like little components of you, like a little Voltron of you.
Yeah.
You might have we all have the taskmaster. Like we can execute like the best out there,
Mm-hmm.
right? You might have a sensitive part, right? That maybe ties with the people pleaser. People who are Enneagram 3s, they tend to not have the like less of like the fear of failure part or the second guessing. They're more action oriented. Like my wife is an artist, and she's just so scared to put herself out there, right? She's very low agency when it comes to taking creative risks.
What's her number? You're a 3, I'm imagining, right?
So, yeah, I'm a 3.
So am I.
I don't. She doesn't know.
Doesn't know? So maybe she's a 9. She could be a 9 then. Dances right like that one that kind of covers it. Yeah. I had Ian Morgan Cron on the program before. We'll link back to the show notes for any of those that are not familiar with the Enneagram, because he actually helped me identify which one I definitely was, because there was a couple of thoughts. He goes, no. Based on this, you're a 3. So keep going. So anyway,
so this thing is like you have these different parts in your body, and the book's called No Bad Parts.
Yep.
Like none of them. Inner critic is a very fierce one for Enneagram 3s. And so none of them are bad. And they've each played a different role for you to keep you safe in your life. And you can almost think of it as like a basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
It's like sometimes one guy's LeBron James. He's been carrying too much of the load. And there's like a creative part that, you're kind of scared to like bring them into the team, even though it might be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like making very small. I'm using, he, because they're parts. And so the thing about the IFS work is you go to the therapist, and it's kind of interesting. They don't ask you like, so tell me about your parents. Like they're like, close your eyes. And they're like, where are you feeling something in your body? You're like, I'm feeling a little tightness in my chest. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the therapist walks you through this, and you basically start talking to the tightness in your chest. And so you might say, you're like, well, what do you feel right now? Like tightness. And this is a part. And it might say something. Mine said, I'm tired. Like that was the first thing it said. And again, the thing that you like, something weird about talking, and this might sound strange if you've never heard this before, but it does seem you kind of leave the rational part of your brain, because like you're talking to a pain in your chest. It's like a little bit like being on psychedelics, where you're kind of like not in your traditional mode of thinking.
Yeah,
I kind of left.
I wonder if for those that are maybe having trouble tapping into that, as soon as you were talking about this, I thought about when I was at physio yesterday, because I have a shoulder thing that's going on right now. And I learned, and I think I heard this like a long time ago, of all things, on a Tony Robbins audio tape like years ago, where he said, and meditation tells you to do this too, like focus on an area of your body, like just try to place your focus there and see what's going on. So yesterday in physio, the guy's like there was pain, there was definite pain. And he's like, okay, so concentrate on where that pain is, close your eyes, breathe deeply. And as I did that, and as he was working on it, it started to release. So that people tell you to do that when you're getting acupuncture, when you're getting, So it seems like there's correlation in terms of like how you would respond. So if you're having trouble going, what do you mean? Talk to like my chest, talk to my but think about it in the same way as I'm getting some body work done, and I really want to get this shoulder loosened up. So I am going to give that shoulder the attention it needs from me, while that practitioner is giving the shoulder the attention that it needs from him. Does that kind of make sense?
Totally. And I think, and to your listeners, I was very skeptical of all this. And I'm like, I can't talk to my chest. Like, what does that even mean? Right. But, I always trust practitioners, especially if they come well referred. And so it starts out. And so the practitioner, who was she asked, how old is this pain? And right away, it's crazy. It's like, it's 12. Like it was
Wow.
a 12-year-old kid. It's like I knew instantly. I didn't need, like, it wasn't even thinking about it. And so 12-year-old K is tired. And it's tired. And later it came out that's this, like, I've been thinking about productivity since I was 10, right?
Mm.
Just like, how do I be more efficient? How do I do more? How do I do more? How do I do more? And I'm just tired. I'm 45 years old. I'm tired, right? And then the therapist, I'll never forget this moment. The therapist asked, well, ask this part. What does it need right now? And so I asked it, what do you need? And the chest pain said, I just want someone to say thank you. And I burst into tears.
Wow.
Like, and I'm not a big crier.
Sure. But still.
And I was sober. So like, it was just this crazy thing. And in that moment, I felt years of fatigue just like melt out of my body. I was tired for 2 weeks after that.
Wow.
And that session was 45 minutes. I mean, it went on, but it was basically that thing, like tired part of K, probably what we've called with her, my therapist, we call the taskmaster, been working overdrive, just wants people to acknowledge him, say thank you, which, by the way, whole different conversation. That's the core tension in my marriage. I'm like, hey, can I get a thank you here? And my wife's like, the internet thanks you every day. I'm not thanking you.
Yeah.
Right. So it showed up in a whole different way.
Yeah.
Right. And so to tie this all back to productivity, think about that shift where you thank this part of you and this flood of whatever just leaves your body. It's like, that's the most, that 45 minutes was the most, like, there was a lot leading up to that, obviously, a lot of inner work, but, and just as a funny cherry on top, since that moment, that was probably about 5 months ago, I have watched more TV in the past 4 or 5 months than I have my entire life.
Wow.
I've watched like every episode of Breaking Bad, Peaky Blinders, Better Call Saul, The Wire. I'm about to start The Sopranos. Like, I've watched all the, like, binge watched. I watched 5 hours of TV last Friday.
Wow.
And I never watch TV during work.
Which is not a lot in the real, like, for most people. Like 5 hours of TV is how people typically, like, that's probably normal, right? For a lot of people, like 5 days a week. And you get to watch Voltron now. You made the Voltron reference. Now you can actually watch Voltron. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time and respectful of those that are keeping up with the podcast, also that are watching the live stream. As we get close to wrapping up here, and I definitely want to have you back on to kind of dive deeper into things. Not 5 years from now, we'll do it sooner than then. But in terms of, like, what are the things that you're doing right now for Rad Reads in your work that you find, you just mentioned like 5 months ago, this happened, you're now embracing more leisure time. What are some of the things that are really exciting you in terms of the work that you're doing now, considering this shift of sorts?
So I basically shifted something. So, obviously I'm very public in much of my work. I basically changed a metric of success. So I have a podcast / video, YouTube videos. I write weekly. I do social media. I have some TikToks and stuff. But the metric of success has become, does the content that I put out into the world drive sincere and earnest conversation? Wow. And it could be a comment on a YouTube video, or it could be a direct email to me off of a podcast episode. And that's just, talk about freedom. It's like, you could have time freedom, but if you still care about what the algo, does for your work, you're a prisoner to something else. Right. And that one shift is just like, then I can just be myself. Right. And I'm not obsessing about metrics and things like that. And so that has been a huge pivot. From that, it's led to a handful of very earnest and sincere conversations, usually around one-on-one coaching. And so I do coaching mostly to folks who are what I call post-achievement and post-financial. So they've achieved a lot of success in, by traditional set markers. And they know that, like someone who's built and sold a company, they could go build and sell another company, but they know that that's not meaningfully going to change their happiness.
Right.
and they're post financial in that, they don't need to work for 2 to 5 years or maybe forever, but they're still feeling very lost. So I do I do one-on-one coaching with that group, and honestly, it's a pretty high price point, and my podcast attracts a lot of that kind of audience. And so again, you just need to have a few earnest conversations with a handful of people, and you've got yourself a nice little business.
Okay, this has been great. Again, let's do this again sooner rather than later. It's been such a pleasure to actually chat. We have mutual friends, obviously, in the industry. Mike Pacquione, who's been on the show before. I know that you know Mike, and there's others that you. Where can people keep up with you and the work that you're doing? And again, thanks to everybody that's watched this on the live stream. But yeah, share where people can keep up with you.
Thanks again for having me, Mike. After all these years of following each other, it's great to actually meet. Radreads.co is kind of the hub. Definitely sign up for our newsletter. That is where kind of the hub for everything. In terms of, I have a podcast called the Examine Life Podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. It's a video podcast. And then I'm probably most active social media wise on Twitter and TikTok.
Excellent. Well, again, Khe, thanks so much for sharing all of this stuff today, and thanks for having a productive conversation with me.
Thank you.
Thanks to Khe for joining me on the program today. Can't wait to have him back on the show. You can check out all of the relevant show notes, links, everything at mikevardy.com/podcast 537. You can also do that wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. We have it on YouTube now as well, Overcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. You can get all of the show notes there. The other thing you can do to support the show, other than check out the show notes, is when you're checking them out, subscribe to the podcast, right? You can do that at mikevardy.com/podcast 537. You could do that on Spotify. You could do that on the YouTube channel, wherever you want to subscribe to the show. It just supports the show and helps us grow our audience. Another way to support the show, of course, is to check out the sponsors that you heard during our conversation today. Go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors, and you can check them out there. Any of them that you're interested in, just use the links there. That way we know that they sent you, or they know that we sent you. Yeah, what a deep conversation. It's got me discombobulated. I hope you can be recombobulated as you leave this episode. I know that I will be, so thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.